Hi, this is Reverend Dr. Nadine Rosechild-Sullivan, and I'm coming to you to read a section from my book, Passing the Baton, Birth Control, Precondition of the Liberation of Women. And I'm going to begin on page 17 and read just a couple of pages of a section called Speaking Evangelical. I have been on both sides of abortion's religio-political fence. I grew up Roman Catholic with 13 years of Catholic school and devout parents who never missed church. And while my grade school and high school religion classes taught by nuns are far from a master's of divinity in Catholic apologetics, I was nonetheless a good student in those classes. And I felt a call to the priesthood, though not to the nunnery. They wouldn't take me because in Catholic theology, by not having a penis, a female-bodied person cannot represent Christ. But I still felt a vocation to the ministry, so I eventually ended up on the Protestant side of the yard, in an evangelical Pentecostal stream that had by then been ordaining women for about 80 years. I was a good student there as well. So to quote someone I once interviewed, I speak evangelical, which is to say that I deeply, experientially understand the worldview and frame of mind of many on the religious right, and in this case, on the religious right side of the abortion issue. Before some anti-abortion activists began to shoot physicians, I remember thinking that Operation Rescue was a marvelous idea. And I have protested in a demonstration against abortion in a pro-life remake of Hands Across America. I believed that life, not just potential life, began. Read, the unique soul of the human individual was created by God the moment the spermatozoon penetrated the ovum, thus creating the zygote. So I believed abortion, every abortion, even very early abortion, was murder. And as my church encouraged, I voted my conscience each election. The primary question I had for each candidate was, if elected, on which side of the abortion issue will you vote? But then I learned some things that I didn't know. And I came to see the issue as much more complex. I came to see that the life of the woman, girl, or potential mother matters as well, matters at least as much as the life of the zygote or fertilized ovum. And I came to understand the number of ways in which the life of the woman, girl, or potential mother could be put at risk by an undesired or unplanned pregnancy, by childbirth, and by 18 plus years of child support and child rearing. I learned that the majority of women who oppose abortion happen to be married, hold a traditional gender role ideology, and are in a time of life in which they can envision slipping another baby into the fold, even if it would be at some burden to them and their already existing families. I learned that historically here and around the world today, the same approximate proportion of women or girls, this is historically, as far as we can statistically generate models, historically across time, here in the United States and the colonial America and everywhere around the world. I learned that historically and around the world today, the same approximate proportions, so proportionate to the population, of women and girls have sought abortion, whether it was or is legal or illegal, and for essentially the same compelling reasons. I learned that some of the reasons are that they were raped, that they were underage, that they were impregnated by incest, which is rape by a family member while underage, that they were in abusive relationships and pregnancy would further bind them to that abuser, and they would also be unable to protect the potential life from that abuser so that any child born with him would grow up by being abused or at least witnessing the emotional, physical, perhaps sexual abuse of their mother. That they were too young to become mothers. That they were too old to become mothers or become mothers again. that they already had all of the children that they or their spouse could financially provide for, that they were in a state of ill health, that they were in a state of ill health in which pregnancy was medically found to be life-threatening, that the embryo or early fetus was found to be in a state of ill health that would lead to a life of limited potential and or constant physical pain for the child. And it would be an early fetus there because these kinds of determinations are generally not made until about midway through the second trimester. So that the fetus was found to be in a state of ill health that would lead to a life of limited potential and or constant physical pain for the child and constant emotional pain for the parents. And could, if the parents predeceased the child, leave the child living beyond their deaths as a burden on their extended family or on the state. That the timing of the pregnancy would derail life plans, including plans that would economically prepare the woman or couple to support a child in the future, thereby having long-term, lifelong repercussions for the woman, girl, or potential mother, and thereby for the potential child. That they were in a place where great social shame would be attached to their being pregnant. That they were not emotionally well-suited or emotionally stable enough for parenting. That they were financially unable to provide for and maybe even to feed or house the potential child. And that assuming the sex had been consensual, their contraception had failed. I learned that women and girls who found it imperative to seek an abortion, but who were forced to seek one illegally, faced frighteningly unsanitary and unanesthetized procedures, often at the hands of untrained and unskilled providers, or unintentionally harmed themselves trying to self-abort, and thus routinely died in large numbers from entirely preventable complications: hemorrhage, visceral injuries, uterine perforations, bladder perforations, bowel perforations, sepsis, septicemia, septic shock. I learned that many of the women and girls who died from botched illegal abortions were already mothers, often of many, many children, and desperate because their family finances were stretched beyond the breaking point. Their abortion was meant to help the children they already had. Their untimely death left their already born children orphaned. I learned that no one liked abortion, that pro-choice people were actually not pro-abortion. I came to recognize that pro-choice people preferred that people use contraception and that people's contraception not fail. That pro-choice people simply face the complexity differently than anti-choice people, realizing that there is more to the picture than the single theological question of the soul status of the fertilized ovum, zygote blastomere, morula, blastocyst, or early embryo. The pro-choice people placed a different value on the life and outcomes of the impregnated female. That there are questions of the woman's or girl's life circumstances and of the life circumstances of the potential child whose needs do not end with the crib and a few packs of diapers, but extend outward, even if healthy and able to someday be self-supporting, for a minimum of a full 18 years of economic, physical, intellectual, and emotional support. The pro-choice people believe children need to be born wanted, and to mothers and families prepared to care for them. And the pro-choice people believe that women and girls, even after a contraceptive accident, have the civil and moral right of self-determination to decide for themselves whether or not they are ready to host a developing embryo, then fetus, for approximately 9 physically trying months, and to then go through the varied experience and or trials of childbirth and delivery. And that pro-choice people believe that women and girls have, even after a contraceptive accident, the civil and moral right of self-determination to decide for themselves whether or not they are ready to dedicate the next 18 or more years to the well-being and the good start in life of another human being. I learned that the circumstances, life, and health of the pregnant woman, child, or potential mother matter too, and that they are not to be dismissed and demeaned as deserving of the trouble they have found themselves in, that women and girls who find themselves with an unwanted pregnancy were not simply negligent or promiscuous or sluts. I learned that no mentally cognizant woman, girl, or potential mother would intentionally use the expense and aggravation of abortion as their preferred or first choice means of contraception. They wouldn't use abortion as birth control. It costs too much in so many ways. I learned that many of those who oppose abortion incongruously oppose contraception as well. That many on the religious right, that many in the anti-choice movement also oppose birth control. Why? It is not an abortifacient, by the way. Hormonal birth control stops ovulation. It does not keep a fertilized ovum from implanting. It stops ovulation. Medical fact, science. I realized that when I was protesting abortion, I was one of those women, married, in an appropriate reproductive time of life, and sufficiently classed and supported that I could, while it would have been tough, imagine slipping another child into the nest without catastrophically overburdening the family I already had. As an opponent of abortion, I was a physically healthy, young, married, stay-at-home mother of 2 healthy children, on a tight budget, yes, but with a husband paying the bills. And I could imagine fitting a 3rd child into our household, knowing we would be able to care for, love, and even diaper and feed it. I was then still prepared to dedicate 18 more years to the good start in life of another human being. Many of those years would have overlapped with years I was already dedicating to the underage children already in my care. But then I remembered I had also been the teenage girl and the young, unmarried, single woman with a pregnancy scare in an era when abortion was illegal, with no backup resources or social support network to absorb an unplanned child, for whom I had no viable means of support. I was lucky. I didn't get pregnant in those years. I had also become the non-traditional student in midlife returning to school, leaving a marriage and beginning a second career, for whom an unplanned pregnancy would have been a source of economic and life course devastation. I was lucky then too. I did not get pregnant at that time either. So while I had been fortunate enough to have my reproductive scares be just that, scares, I came to realize that if my scares had become actualities as a teen or as the mother of nearly grown teens, it would have meant utter shipwreck, and I might have sought an abortion myself. The fact is, human sexuality and human reproduction are messy. They don't lend themselves to neat or rigid answers. I had to face my own life experience and the history of women's contraceptive access even across my own lifespan. As my mother's daughter, as the oldest daughter of a woman who gave birth 12 times to 13 full-term children in 15 years' time, 10 of whom were conceived before the birth control pill was legal across the United States for use by married women, I remember the day, quoted above, when my mother said, "All 13 of you were rhythm babies." That day she added, "When the Pope gets pregnant, I'll have another one." And she kept her word. She went on birth control. She did not have another one. But the doctrine of the church set her up. 42 years later, as she approached death, she agonized, that she had kept God from bringing 4 to 6 more children into the earth through her. She stopped bearing 6 years before her medically necessary hysterectomy. And she died feeling guilty that she had not born and reared 17 to 19 instead of a mere 13 children. As my sister's sister, who watched her teenage belly grow as she studied week by week the gestational progress of her zygote to embryo to fetus to neonate, who saw her tears when the teenage father deserted her, who wept as our culturally shamed parents forced her into giving up her much loved, much wanted daughter, who watched her cry across the years whenever that child was mentioned, even after she'd had others. As my sister's sister, I know that adoption is not a quick and easy answer to an unprepared or unplanned pregnancy. I know that human offspring brought to or near term cannot generally be given away to a good home, like a kitten or a puppy, so that the woman, girl, or potential mother simply gets on with her life and doesn't look back. Instead, having felt their fetus move inside them, because we're talking about someone who's brought a child to term, way past the first trimester, when it has become a fetus. Instead, having felt their fetus move inside them and likely having seen or even held their newborn at birth, most worry and wonder across their lifetime about the fate of their child and agonize about whether or not they made the right decision. Are they loved, provided for, well treated, encouraged, happy? I recognized being forced by circumstances or authorities, including one's own parents, the grandparents, to give up a child you carried to viability to term is often a devastating, life-altering, self-concept defining experience. As my friend's friend, as my congregant's pastor, as my client's counselor, I have watched single mothers of 1 or more pre-adolescent children carrying the lion's share of the caregiving and the financial burden, scrubbing floors, serving drinks, doing hair and facials, working night shift to house and feed the children they already have, when a new man who promised them a son just didn't happen to have a condom whenever the moment for intimacy arrived, or once begun, outright refused to wear one, or pulled it off mid-coitus without permission. Hashtag stealthing equals rape. And women in longer term relationships who relied on their boyfriend's good faith coitus interruptus, or withdrawal, left with another mouth to feed, a redoubled daycare bill, twice the expenses, half the sleep, triple the fear of failing. I remembered the scars and burdens we, as women, are subject to, the circumventions we make, the determination and heart that sustain us, and the luck and social structures that fail us. Till next time.